The silver core bullets were never meant for a waitress. They were forged in military labs for the undead monarch who'd ruled the city's shadows for 5 centuries, a vampire king whose name was whispered in fear and whose red eyes had watched empires rise and fall. But when the shots screamed through the rain-slicked darkness outside the Midnight Diner, Lena Cross didn't think about ancient prophecies or the fact that the pale-haired man standing alone on that street could drain her dry with a thought. She just saw someone about to die. She moved. And as her blood mixed with rainwater on the cracked pavement, pulling around military-grade rounds that should have ended her instantly, she didn't know she had just broken a curse 500 years old and awakened something in a monster king that he thought had died centuries ago, his humanity. The closing shift at the Midnight Diner was a symphony of exhaustion. The hiss of burnt coffee against hot plates. The clatter of silverware dropped into plastic bins. The endless buzz of the dying neon sign that spelled open 24 hours with a flickering H. For Lena Cross, it was just another Thursday night where her feet screamed inside worn sneakers held together with superglue and her rent was 3 days overdue. "Lena, table 6 needs a refill," Marcus called from behind the grill, his voice carrying that particular weariness that came from 12 years of working the graveyard shift. "Got it," Lena said, her voice steady despite the aches spreading from her heels to her spine. She grabbed the chipped coffee pot and moved through the maze of cracked vinyl booths and formica tables that had seen better decades. The diner existed on the border. To the east, the mortal district, struggling, fearful, human. To the west, the vampire quarter, prosperous, dangerous, off-limits after dark. The Midnight Diner was neutral ground, or as neutral as anything could be in a city divided by species and centuries of bloodshed. But tonight, the air had shifted. A strange tension had settled over the back corner booth, the one by the rain-streaked window that overlooked the empty street. Lena approached slowly, coffee pot warming her raw hands. The booth was occupied by a man who looked like he'd been carved from marble and dressed in clothes from another century. His coat was elaborate, dark as midnight with silver embroidery that caught the fluorescent light strangely. Even sitting down, he radiated the kind of presence that made the air itself seem heavier. King Lucian. Even Lena, who avoided gossip and kept her head down, knew the name. The papers didn't write about him, they wouldn't dare. But the rumors spoke of old money, older power, and a coldness that had frozen 500 years ago and never thawed. He was beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful, dangerous, devastating, absolute. His hair fell past his shoulders, silver gray like moonlight on snow. And his eyes. Lena had heard about the red eyes. Everyone had. But seeing them was different. They glowed faintly in the diner's dim light, ancient and alien and utterly inhuman. "Coffee," he said. Not a request. A statement. Lena poured without comment, watching the dark liquid fill the cup. Her hand didn't shake. She'd served demanding customers before, investment bankers at 4 a.m., drunk college kids, truckers who thought service workers existed for their amusement. A vampire king was just another person who needed caffeine. She set the pot down and turned to leave. "You're not afraid?" It wasn't a question, but Lena paused anyway. She looked back at him, really looked. Past the inhuman beauty and the predator stillness. She saw exhaustion. The kind that lived in bones. The kind that came from carrying too much for too long. "Should I be?" she asked quietly. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe. As if no one had asked him that question in centuries. Most are. "Most people are afraid of what they don't understand," Lena said, and she heard herself speaking words she hadn't planned. "But you ordered coffee. That's pretty human." King Lucian stared at her. The air around the table grew dense, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Staff at the Midnight Diner had learned long ago that powerful people, especially powerful vampires, were not questioned, not challenged, not treated like they were ordinary. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone unreadable, his gaze narrowing just slightly. Lena didn't flinch. She met those red eyes and held them. Black coffee at 3 a.m., she continued, unable to stop herself now. Either you're exhausted or you're thinking too much. Both pretty universal, if you ask me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, both. 20 minutes later, Lena returned to his table. His cup was half empty, and he sat with the stillness of someone who'd forgotten how to fidget, how to display any vulnerability through movement. She refilled his cup without being asked. King Lucien looked up sharply, as if she'd done something shocking rather than simply following basic server protocol. You didn't need to. Fresh coffee tastes better, Lena said simply. And you look like you could use something that doesn't taste like it's been sitting for an hour. He studied her face with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable. She could feel him cataloging details, the shadows under her eyes, the frayed edge of her uniform, the calluses on her hands from years of manual work. But what he said was, "What's your name?" "Lena. Lena Cross." "Thank you, Lena Cross." The words were formal, distant, but something in his expression had softened. Just barely. Like ice beginning to crack. At 3:17 a.m., King Lucien stood to leave. He placed a $100 bill on the table, far more than the $7 check warranted. "Keep it," he said when Lena tried to protest. "For the coffee. And the conversation." "We barely talked," Lena said, confused. "Exactly." He moved toward the door with that unnatural grace vampires had, smooth and predator-fast. His security detail, 2 vampires in dark suits who'd been seated separately throughout the diner, rose as one and followed. Lena picked up the bill, pressing it against her chest like a prayer. It was rent. It was groceries. It was the electric bill she'd been dodging for weeks. She ran toward the door, gratitude already forming on her lips. She needed to thank him properly, to acknowledge that this small gesture had just saved her life in its own quiet way. The night air hit her like cold water. Rain misted down in sheets, catching the glow of the street lamps and turning the pavement into a mirror. A sleek black car idled at the curb, armored, expensive, meant for royalty. King Lucien stood alone on the sidewalk, his back to the diner, looking up at the rain as if seeing weather for the first time in years. That's when Lena saw it. Across the street, barely visible through the downpour. A dark van sat with its engine running. The rear door slid open. Not much. Just enough for multiple silhouettes to emerge. Moonlight glinting off metal that seemed to drink the light. Rifles. Military grade. Aimed directly at the Vampire King. Time collapsed into a single crystalline moment. The security guards were moving toward the car, scanning the wrong direction. King Lucien stood isolated, vulnerable, his pale hair streaming with rainwater. No one saw. No one but her. "Get down!" Lena screamed, and her voice didn't sound like her own. It was raw, desperate, animal. She didn't think. Didn't calculate odds or survival. Didn't consider that she was mortal, breakable, about to throw herself between military weapons and an immortal king. The $100 bill fell from her hands, fluttering into puddles. She didn't run away from danger. She ran toward it, 10 feet between her and the Vampire King. The first bullet caught Lena in the shoulder before she even reached him, spinning her sideways with the force of a freight train. She didn't feel pain, not yet. Just impact. The shocking violence of metal tearing through flesh and bone, the wet heat of blood blooming across her white uniform. The second and third hit nearly simultaneously. Ribs. Abdomen. Each round punched through her body with surgical precision, silver core rounds designed to end a mortal life, ripping through mortal flesh like tissue paper. She hit the pavement hard, her vision fragmenting into shards of neon and rain and darkness. Above her, King Lucien stood frozen in shock, his red eyes wide with something that might have been horror. Then he moved. He was beside her in less than a heartbeat, dropping to his knees in the spreading pool of her blood. His hands, those pale, elegant hands that had signed death warrants and ruled through fear, reached for her instinctively, catching her before her head could crack against concrete. "You fool," he breathed, and his voice shook. You absolute fool, what have you done? Lena tried to speak. Blood filled her mouth instead. She was dying. She could feel it, the wet collapse of punctured lung, the terrible cold spreading from her core, the way the rain suddenly felt warm against her skin because she was colder than winter. King Lucien's fingers pressed against her shoulder wound, trying uselessly to stop the bleeding. His skin touched her blood-soaked uniform, her torn flesh, the silver-poisoned mess of her shattered body. He didn't scream. He should have. Every vampire text, every historical account, every whispered legend said the same thing. Human blood burned vampire flesh like acid. Human touch was agony. The burning touch curse had lasted 500 years without exception. But Lucien's hands stayed steady on her wounds. His skin remained unmarked. "You're not burning me," he whispered, and the vulnerability in those words was more shocking than the bullets had been. His ancient red eyes met her fading brown ones, and for one crystalline moment, prophecy and impossibility and 5 centuries of isolation shattered between them. Then his expression changed. Shock transformed into something primordial. Something that had ruled the night for half a millennium. Rage. Lucien's head snapped up, tracking the assassins across the street with predator precision. They were already running, abandoning their position, but they might as well have been standing still. He moved like death given form. One moment he was cradling Lena. The next he was across the street, a blur of dark coat and silver hair and inhuman speed. The screams were brief, wet, final. When he returned, seconds later, though it felt like hours to Lena's dying brain, his hands were clean. Vampire bodies didn't leave the same evidence human ones did. They turned to ash, to dust, to nothing. He dropped beside her again, gathering her broken body against his chest with shocking gentleness. "Stay with me," he commanded, and even dying, Lena recognized it as an order from a king. "That's not a request, Lena Cross. Stay." Sirens wailed in the distance. The diner door burst open, Marcus and Margie and a dozen late-night customers spilling onto the rain-slicked street. Phones were already out, recording, broadcasting, spreading the impossible image across the city, the vampire king holding a dying mortal woman like she was precious. Vampire security arrived first, the 2 guards who'd failed to see the threat, now moving with military efficiency. "Sire, we need to." "She is under royal protection," Lucien snarled, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Mine. Anyone who touches her dies." Mortal police screeched to a halt seconds later, hands on weapons, confused by the scene before them. A massacre. A dying woman. A vampire king who refused to release his burden. "Ambulance," one officer started. "No." Lucien stood, lifting Lena like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Her blood soaked into his expensive coat. "My physicians. Now." "Sir, she needs to live." His red eyes blazed with something beyond rage, beyond fear. "And she will. At any cost." Lena's vision was darkening, the rain and neon and faces blurring into watercolor abstraction. But she felt his arms around her. Heard his voice, centuries old and utterly desperate, giving orders she couldn't quite parse. "Save her. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what laws we break. Save her." The darkness took her gently, and Lena Cross fell into nothing, not knowing she'd just rewritten the future of 2 species with one instinctive act of protection. Lena woke to stone and silence. Not the antiseptic brightness of a hospital. Not the familiar water-stained ceiling of her studio apartment. Ancient stone walls curved overhead, lit by candles that burned without flickering, their flames too steady to be natural. Tapestries older than the country itself hung in shadows, depicting battles fought when vampires still walked openly among mortals. She was in the vampire district. Deep in it. Easy. The voice was smooth, clinical. A pale man in dark clothing materialized beside her bed, not walked, materialized. "You've been unconscious for 36 hours. Your body needs time to process what happened. Where Alina's throat felt like sandpaper. King Lucien's private stronghold. He checked something on a tablet that looked wildly anachronistic against the medieval architecture. I'm Dr. Soren. I've been treating your silver poisoning. Silver poisoning? The memories crashed back. Rain. Bullets. Blood. I should be dead. Yes. Dr. Soren's expression was unreadable. You took 3 silver core rounds at close range. They were designed to destroy vampire tissue on contact. For a human, the silver toxicity alone should have been fatal within minutes. He paused, and something like wonder crossed his ancient face. But you're not dying. You're healing. Impossibly, but healing. The door opened with the weight of centuries behind it. King Lucien entered, and the room somehow felt smaller, despite its cavernous dimensions. He changed clothes, no more blood-soaked coat, but he looked exhausted in a way that transcended mere physical tiredness. Leave us, he said quietly, and Dr. Soren obeyed without question. The silence stretched thin between them. Lucien stood by the window, his back to her, looking out over the vampire district's gothic spires and midnight streets. Why did you do it? His voice was carefully controlled, but something raw lived underneath. Lena tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her shoulder, her ribs, her abdomen, but it was manageable pain. Healing pain. I saw someone about to die. I'm immortal. You would have died anyway. Those bullets were meant for you. He turned, and his red eyes were churning with emotions she couldn't name. But why? You don't know me. I'm a monster. My people have hunted yours for centuries. Why would you? Because you're someone's son, Lena interrupted, and the words came from somewhere deep and true. Someone's friend. Someone who drinks coffee at 3 in the morning because he thinks too much. You matter. That's reason enough. Lucien stared at her like she'd spoken a language dead for millennia. His hands clenched at his sides, and for a moment she saw past the king, past the vampire, to something achingly human underneath. No one has said that to me in 500 years. Before Lena could respond, the door opened again. A vampire entered, older than Dr. Soren, dressed in formal robes that spoke of rank and authority. His smile was warm, but something about it made Lena's skin prickle. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. His voice was honey-smooth. But the council is demanding answers about our guest. This is Chancellor Marius, Lucien said, his formal mask sliding back into place. My chief advisor. The girl who broke the curse, Marius said, studying Lena with interest that felt too sharp, too calculating. The prophecy speaks of this, you know. The Crimson Shield. A mortal whose willing sacrifice breaks the burning touch and changes everything. His smile widened. Though personally, I wonder if the prophecy mentioned how dangerous such change might be. The curse is real? Lena asked. Was real, Lucien corrected quietly. For 5 centuries, human blood burned vampire flesh on contact. It made connection impossible. Kept our species separate. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Until you. You can't go home, Marius said gently, though the gentleness felt performative. The assassination attempt means someone wants you dead. And now that the city knows what you are, what you represent, he spread his hands apologetically. You're the most dangerous woman alive. To some, you're salvation. To others, you're an existential threat. Lena looked at the stone walls, the ancient tapestries, the vampire king who'd carried her broken body to safety. She thought about her studio apartment with its water-stained ceiling, her life of invisibility and exhaustion. She'd thrown that life away the moment she moved. How long, she asked. Until you're safe? Marius's smile never reached his eyes. That depends entirely on whether people believe prophecies are destiny or just dangerous ideas that should die before they spread. 3 days into her recovery, Lena discovered the stronghold was less fortress and more labyrinth. Dr. Soren had cleared her for supervised movement, which apparently meant wandering ancient corridors alone while guards pretended not to follow her. She found Lucien's private study by accident, A door left slightly ajar, spilling warm light into the hallway. Inside, books lined every wall from floor to vaulted ceiling. Not just vampire texts, but human literature spanning centuries. Shakespeare beside Toni Morrison. Ancient Greek philosophy next to contemporary physics. Someone who still learned after 500 years of existence. And in the corner, beneath a skylight that let in the last traces of dusk, King Lucian stood before an easel, paintbrush in hand. He didn't hear her approach. Didn't notice her presence until she spoke. "You paint." The brush clattered to the floor. Lucian spun, vulnerability flashing across his face before the mask slammed back down. "This is a private." "It's beautiful," Lena said, stepping closer to see the canvas. A cityscape. Not the vampire district with its gothic spires, but the mortal side. The midnight diner rendered in oils, its dying neon sign glowing against darkness. "When did you start?" "I was human once." The words came quietly, reluctantly. "Before. I used to paint in Florence. It was the only thing I kept." Lena settled into a worn armchair without asking permission. Her shoulder still ached, but the pain was manageable now. "Tell me. Why should I?" "Because I've been invisible my whole life," she said. "Working jobs where people look through me like I'm furniture. And you've been too visible. A legend. A monster. A king. Maybe we both need someone who sees us as just people." Something in Lucian's posture softened. He retrieved the fallen brush, cleaning it with practiced movements, then sat across from her, not behind his desk, but in the matching chair as if they were equals. "I was 26 when I was turned. Renaissance Florence, 1525. My best friend, someone I trusted absolutely, decided immortality was worth any price. Including betrayal." His red eyes grew distant. He didn't ask. Just took. "And when I woke 3 days later, the world burned. Human touch seared my skin. Human blood was acid. The curse appeared with my transformation, as if God himself had decided to punish me for becoming this." That's when you learn to stay distant. That's when distance became survival. He studied her face. "Why did you really do it?" "That night, you had seconds to decide." Lena exhaled slowly. "I can't watch suffering without acting. It's compulsive. Probably unhealthy. I see someone hurt and I just move. I don't think about consequences or whether I'm qualified to help. I just refuse to stand by. That could get you killed." It already almost did. The truth hung between them like something tangible. Then Lena did something insane. She reached across the space separating their chairs and placed her hand over his. Lucian froze. His eyes dropped to their joined hands, hers warm and calloused from labor, his pale and unmarked by time. For 500 years, this simple gesture had meant agony. Connection was impossible. Touch was torture. But her skin against his felt like nothing except warmth. "It still doesn't hurt," he whispered, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Good," Lena said softly. Her phone buzzed, the 5th time that hour. Marcus again. She'd been ignoring his messages, but the preview on her lock screen was visible. "The city's going crazy. They're calling you a saint. Come home. Please." "You should read them," Lucian said, though he didn't pull his hand away. Lena unlocked her phone. The messages painted chaos. Mortal district celebrating her sacrifice. Vampire district divided between those who saw prophecy fulfilled and those who saw existential threat. News coverage, protests, her face on every screen. "You've become a symbol," Lucian said. "Neither of us chose this." A knock interrupted them. Chancellor Marius entered without waiting for permission, his expression carefully neutral as he noted their joined hands. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but the Council has reached consensus." His tone was apologetic, but his eyes were calculating. For Miss Cross's safety, she should be returned to mortal territory. "The prophecy is causing instability. Vampire hardliners are threatening violence. Mortal activists are demanding access to you." Perhaps if she went home, publicly, the tensions would ease before someone gets hurt. Lucian's hand tightened imperceptibly around Lena's. "I'll consider it," he said. But Marius's smile suggested he'd already won. The council chamber existed in the oldest part of the stronghold, where candlelight couldn't quite banish the shadows and the stone remembered centuries of blood. Chancellor Marius stood at the head of an obsidian table, surrounded by faces that had watched empires fall and refused to mourn their passing. "The girl is a catalyst," Marius said, his smooth voice carrying absolute conviction. The Crimson Shield prophecy was supposed to remain myth. Comfortable distance between species has kept us safe for 500 years. Now mortals will demand equality, access, rights. He let the word hang like an obscenity. They'll demand we become civilized. Lord Corvus, a vampire who'd been ancient when Lucian was human, nodded gravely. "The king is compromised. Sentiment has made him weak." "Not weak," Marius corrected carefully. "Distracted. He doesn't remember what I did for him." His eyes grew distant, remembering. "Florence, 1525. I turned him to save him from human frailty. But immortality alone wasn't enough. He needed to be separate. Untouchable. So I created the curse, the burning touch." Ancient magic bound to his transformation, ensuring human contact would always mean agony. A cold smile. "A king who cannot be touched cannot be controlled by mortal sentiment." He remained pure. Perfect. Isolated. Until her, Lady Vex hissed. "The assassination was supposed to be clean," Marius continued. "Remove Lucian before the prophecy could manifest. I'd have ruled in his stead, maintained our separation, kept everyone safe from the chaos of integration." He spread his hands philosophically. But the waitress moved faster than anticipated. "Now we have a different problem." "Kill them both," Corvus suggested. "Too visible now. She's a symbol. Killing her makes her a martyr." Marius's expression hardened. "No. We separate them. Return her to mortal territory. And when tensions inevitably explode, when mortals demand too much, too fast, we remind everyone why separation was necessary in the first place." "How?" Lady Vex asked. "An attack. Mortal district. Blamed on rogue elements, of course. Nothing that traces to us." Marius's smile was patient, practiced. "Fear is a better teacher than hope. Always has been." In Lucian's study, the king stared at financial records spread across his desk like evidence of his own blindness. Dr. Soren stood nearby, looking physically ill despite centuries of composing himself. "The payments went through shell companies," Soren explained quietly. "But they terminate with Marius. He funded the assassination team. Provided intelligence on your location. Ensured your security would be undermined at the critical moment." Lucian's hands trembled, not with fear, but with rage so profound it had no outlet. 500 years. He's been my closest advisor for 500 years. There's more. Soren slid another document forward. "Medical texts. Dated to your transformation. He didn't just turn you, Lucian. He cursed you. The burning touch wasn't divine punishment. It was Marius ensuring you'd never form genuine connections. That you'd always need him, always trust him, because he was the only one who understood your isolation." The study door burst open. Lena entered without knocking, her face flushed with anger and fear. "We need to talk. Now." "Not the best time," Soren started. "I overheard guards in the east corridor. They were discussing an attack. Mortal district. Tomorrow night. They said Chancellor Marius approved it personally." Her eyes found Lucian's. "You need to stop this." "I didn't authorize." "I know." Lena's voice softened slightly. "But your people are planning it anyway. Which means either you've lost control, or you've been allowing this to happen for so long they don't think you'll care." Lucian stood, 5 centuries of authority radiating from him like cold fire. "Be very careful with your accusations, Lena." "Or what?" She stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated. "You'll send me home like Marius wants? Back to the mortal district just in time to die in whatever attack he's planning." Her voice rose. "You can't prevent war by letting your people terrorize mine. That's not peace. That's oppression with a crown. I keep them afraid so they stay alive, Lucien snarled, and the mask finally cracked. Do you think mortals would survive open conflict? My people are faster, stronger, immortal. Fear is the only thing preventing slaughter. No. Lena's voice was deadly quiet. You keep them afraid so you don't have to change. So you don't have to risk being wrong. So you don't have to admit that maybe, just maybe, your 500 years of isolation taught you cruelty instead of wisdom. The silence that followed was absolute. Lucien looked at her like she'd struck him. Like she'd seen something he'd hidden even from himself. You think I'm cruel. I think you're terrified, Lena said, and her voice gentled. I think the curse made you believe distance was safety. That if you never got close to anyone, you could never be betrayed again. But Lucien, she reached for his hand, and he let her take it. You were already betrayed. By the person you trusted most. Marius turned you. Cursed you. Controlled you for 5 centuries. And you never even knew. Dr. Soren cleared his throat. She's right, Your Majesty. The evidence is conclusive. Lucien stared at their joined hands. At the impossible warmth of her touch. At the prophecy made flesh standing in his study, dismantling everything he'd built his reign upon. If I change our laws, there will be resistance. Violence. Some of my people will see it as weakness. The explosion cut him off. The entire stronghold shuddered. Stone dust rained from ancient ceilings. Alarms, modern technology grafted onto medieval architecture, began shrieking. Lucien moved to the window. Below, in the stronghold's courtyard, fire bloomed against the night. Smoke. Chaos. The screams of guards mobilizing. East Wing, Soren said, checking his tablet with shaking hands. Multiple explosives. Coordinated attack. Lena's phone lit up. Marcus, calling desperately. She answered. Lena, thank God, there's been an explosion in the Mortal District. The diner. Multiple casualties. They're saying it was vampires, that it's retaliation for you. The phone fell from her numb fingers. Lucien turned to her, and in his red eyes she saw the same realization she felt in her bones. The conspiracy wasn't waiting for tomorrow. The war had already begun. The stronghold shook again, closer this time. Ancient stone cracked like bones breaking. Through the study window, Lena saw figures pouring into the courtyard. Vampires in tactical gear, moving with military precision. Not external attackers. Internal coup. Safe room. Now. Lucien grabbed her arm, already pulling her toward the hidden door behind his desk. Lena wrenched free. My people are dying. The diner, Marcus, everyone I know. You'll die too if you don't. I didn't take 3 bullets just to hide while both our districts burn. Her voice cracked with fury and desperation. You want me to be the Crimson Shield? Then let me shield. Another explosion. Closer. The study door burst open, not Marius's forces, but Dr. Soren with 6 mortal servants, kitchen staff, and cleaners who'd worked the stronghold for years. Their faces were painted with terror. The attackers are herding mortals toward the eastern corridors, Soren said rapidly. It's a kill zone. They're executing everyone who can't fight back. I know a way out. Lena's mind raced, assembling mental maps from days of exploring. The old servants' passages. They connect to the undercroft, then to the street. She looked at Lucien. You fight. I'll get them out. You're injured. I'm a waitress who carried 50-pound trays for 6 years. I'm stronger than I look. She grabbed an iron candlestick from his desk, not much, but better than nothing. Trust me. For one heartbeat, Lucien hesitated. Then he pulled a knife from his desk drawer, pressed it into her hand. The passage's exit near the old cathedral. Marcus knows the area. Get them there. His red eyes burned with something beyond fear. Stay alive. That's an order. Same to you, Your Majesty. Then chaos consumed them both. Lena led the mortals through corridors that smelled of centuries, her shoulders screaming with each movement. Behind them, the sounds of battle, screams, crashes, the wet sound of violence that didn't need explaining. Two young women from the kitchen were sobbing. An older man who cleaned the libraries kept praying in Latin. Lena kept them moving. Left here, she whispered, consulting the mental map. Quiet. We're passing near the main hall. Footsteps ahead. Heavy boots. Vampire speed. Lena shoved the mortals into a side alcove, pressing them flat against the stone. 3 of Marius's soldiers passed within feet, weapons drawn, hunting. Sweep the eastern wing, kill anyone who isn't marked. When they passed, Lena continued forward. 12 people depending on her. Marcus's face in her mind. The diner, her home for 6 years, in flames. She'd be damned if anyone else died tonight. Meanwhile, Lucien moved through his stronghold like death incarnate. 5 centuries of combat experience channeled into surgical violence. Marius's forces were skilled, but they'd underestimated their king. Underestimated what rage could do when filtered through immortal strength and absolute conviction. He found 3 of them in the portrait hall, setting charges to bring down the ceiling. None of them left that hallway. Lucien's hands were steady as he disarmed the explosives. His clothes were soaked with blood, none of it his. The monster they'd feared for 500 years had finally been given permission to be exactly what he was. But he fought toward Lena. Always toward where he'd last seen her. They reunited in the communications center, Lucien bursting through the main door as Lena emerged from the servants' entrance, mortal refugees trailing behind her. She was bleeding from a cut above her eye, her white uniform torn and filthy, but alive. Gloriously, impossibly alive. You're hurt. It's nothing. Lena grabbed his arm. We need to broadcast. Now. Before Marius controls the narrative. Dr. Soren was already at the controls, overriding every screen in the city, Vampire District and Mortal. His fingers flew across keyboards as explosions continued shaking the building. Ready, he said. Lucien stood before the camera, and Lena stood beside him. Not behind. Beside. Equal. This is King Lucien, he began, his voice carrying 5 centuries of authority. What you're witnessing is not mortal terrorism. It's a coup. Chancellor Marius has spent 500 years manipulating our species into isolation. He created the Burning Touch curse to control me. He orchestrated the assassination attempt that led to its breaking. And now he's attacking both districts to restart the war we've been fighting to prevent. Lena leaned forward. I'm Lena Cross. I'm nobody special, just a waitress from the midnight diner. But I've seen what fear does to people. On both sides. And I'm done being afraid. Her voice strengthened. Marius wants us divided because our separation gives him power. But what if we chose something else? What if we chose each other? Across the city, screens lit with their faces. In the Mortal District, Marcus watched from the burning ruins of the diner, rallying neighbors with whatever weapons they could find. In the Vampire Quarter, Lucien's loyal nobles saw their king standing with a mortal woman, blood-soaked but unbowed. Then the broadcast cut. Every screen in the city flickered, changed. Chancellor Marius appeared, seated in what looked like the throne room, guards flanking him. Citizens of both districts, he said smoothly. I regret to inform you that King Lucien has been compromised by mortal influence. For the safety of our species, I am assuming emergency authority. His smile was practiced, paternal. The human girl who calls herself the Crimson Shield is a threat to 5 centuries of stability. Her death, and the death of the corrupted king who protects her, is regrettable but necessary. He spread his hands. I promise to end the infection of human sympathy that threatens to destroy everything we've built. Separation kept us safe. It will again. The screen went dark. Lena looked at Lucien. He looked back. The throne room, he said quietly. Together, she replied. And through the burning stronghold, past the bodies of those who'd chosen the wrong side, they went to face 500 years of careful manipulation made flesh. The throne room doors had been built to withstand armies. Lucien tore them from their hinges with his bare hands. Inside, Chancellor Marius sat on the ancient throne as if he'd been born to it, robed in ceremonial regalia that hadn't been worn in 2 centuries. Around him stood his faction, 30 vampires who'd chosen coup over loyalty. And kneeling before the dais, bound with silver chains that burned their skin, were the hostages. Marcus was among them. His face bloodied but defiant, his eyes finding Lena's the moment she entered. Dramatic entrance, Marius observed, rising from the throne with practiced grace. Though predictable. You always were sentimental, Lucien. It's your greatest weakness. You orchestrated everything. Lucien's voice was deadly quiet, each word sharp enough to cut. The assassination. The curse. 500 years of isolation. 500 years of protection, Marius corrected. I saved you from human frailty in Florence. Made you immortal. But immortality without purpose is chaos. He descended the steps slowly, confidently. So yes, I cast the burning touch. Ancient magic bound to your transformation, ensuring you'd never form attachments that could be exploited. You needed to be separate. Untouchable. Perfect. The air in the throne room grew cold enough that mortal breath became visible fog. You made me a monster. I made you a king. Marius's patience was fraying. And you were magnificent. Untouchable. Incorruptible. Until he gestured dismissively at Lena. Broke what took me centuries to perfect. Lucien moved. The fight was brutal, instantaneous, 500 years of vampire power colliding. They blurred across the throne room, crashing through ancient pillars, shattering marble, each impact like thunder. Marius was older, had prepared longer. But Lucien fought with something Marius had spent centuries ensuring he'd never possess, conviction born from connection rather than isolation. Lucien's hand closed around Marius's throat, slamming him against the throne itself. Centuries of rage channeled into one moment of absolute dominance. You stole 500 years from me, Lucien snarled, fangs bared. Made me believe I was cursed by God when it was just your ambition. Do it, Marius choked out, smiling despite the hand crushing his windpipe. Kill me. Prove you're exactly what I made you. A monster who solves problems with violence. Lucien's hand tightened. Stop. Lena's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rage like a blade through water. She stepped between them, mortal, fragile, insane, placing her hand on Lucien's arm. If you kill him like this, you prove he was right about you, she said quietly. That you're just a monster who solves problems with violence. But you're not. Not anymore. Lucien's red eyes met hers, churning with 5 centuries of pain. He deserves trial. Justice. The thing you're trying to build. Lena turned to face Marius, and despite everything, her voice remained steady. You're terrified of change because your power depends on division. You need us to hate each other because if we don't, you're irrelevant. Just an old vampire clinging to control. She stepped away from them both, addressing the entire throne room, Marius's faction, the hostages, the loyal guards who'd followed Lucien through the stronghold. I'm nobody special, Lena said, and her voice filled the cavernous space. I'm a waitress who barely makes rent. My shoes have superglue holding them together. 3 weeks ago, my biggest worry was making rent. But I saw someone in danger and I moved. That's not prophecy. That's not destiny. That's choice. She looked at Marcus, still bound in silver. At the mortal servants she'd led to safety. At the vampire guards who'd fought beside their king. All of you can make the same choice. Choose connection over fear. Choose justice over vengeance. Choose to believe that maybe, just maybe, we're better together than we are afraid. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marcus struggled to his feet despite the silver burns, chains rattling. I'm with her. The other mortal hostages rose. One by one. We're with her. Dr. Soren stepped forward from where he'd been hidden among the crowd. I'm with my king. The real king. Not this pretender who built his power on lies. Lucien's loyal nobles moved forward, surrounding Marius's faction. Outnumbered. Outmaneuvered. the coup collapsing like a house built on sand. Marius saw it happening. 5 centuries of careful manipulation unraveling in minutes. His face twisted with desperate rage, and he moved, vampire speed, pulling a silver blade, lunging not for Lucien but for Lena. If I can't have control, no one. Lucien was faster. He caught Marius's wrist mid-strike, twisted it until bones snapped and the blade clattered away. Then he threw the Chancellor to the ground with enough force to crack marble, kneeling on his chest with one hand pressed to his throat. You taught me to rule through fear, Lucien said quietly. Through isolation and cruelty and absolute dominance. He looked up at Lena, at Marcus, at everyone watching. But she taught me something else. That strength isn't about how much pain you can inflict. It's about how much change you can endure. He stood, leaving Marius gasping on the cracked marble. You'll face trial. Mortal and vampire judges. Evidence presented. Justice, not vengeance. Lucien's voice carried the weight of 5 centuries finally turned toward purpose. That's what separates us from what you tried to make us. Guards moved forward, binding Marius with chains strong enough to hold ancient vampires. His faction surrendered without the Chancellor's authority backing them. The throne room fell silent except for breathing, mortal and immortal both. Lucien looked at the throne, that seat of absolute authority he'd occupied for 500 years. Then he looked at Lena, bloodstained and exhausted and gloriously human. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Build something new. Rule with compassion instead of fear. Good thing you're immortal, Lena said, allowing herself the smallest smile. You've got time to learn. Outside, dawn was breaking. The city waited scarred, frightened, watching to see if prophecy would become reality or just another broken promise in a history full of them. But in the throne room, standing together among the ruins of the old order, a vampire king and a waitress from the midnight diner began the work of building something that had never existed before. Hope. 3 weeks after the coup, the Great Hall had been transformed. The ancient chamber where vampire nobility had gathered for centuries now held a different kind of assembly. On one side of the long obsidian table sat vampire nobles, some loyal from the beginning, others grudgingly accepting the new order. On the other side sat elected mortal representatives, chosen by their districts in hastily organized votes. Marcus among them, his arms still bandaged from silver burns. King Lucien stood at the head of the table, Lena beside him. Not behind. Beside. This is the Joint Council, Lucien announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned rather than inherited. From this day forward, no law affecting both our peoples passes without representation from both our peoples. Lord Corvus, who'd sided with Marius and been granted clemency, looked physically ill. Your Majesty, surely. No more hunts, Lucien continued, cutting him off. No more claiming mortal territory as feeding grounds. No more treating humans as prey or property. His red eyes swept the room. 500 years of fear ends today. Not because fear wasn't effective, but because it was never right. The vampire side of the table erupted in protest. The mortal side watched with suspicious hope, waiting to see if promises would become policy or just pretty words that evaporated under pressure. You're asking us to deny our nature, Lady Vex protested. I'm asking you to evolve past it, Lucien replied. We have blood banks, medical donations, willing participants who understand consent. We don't need to hunt. We choose to because it's easier than change. And what do mortals give up? Corvus demanded. Or is this surrender entirely one-sided? Marcus stood, his voice rough but steady. We give up the right to hunt you back. To live in constant fear. To pass laws that treat vampires as monsters by default. He looked at the mortal representatives. We're afraid. I won't pretend we're not. But fear is a choice too. And I choose to believe we're better than our worst impulses. The debate lasted hours. Compromises were hammered out, enforcement mechanisms, oversight committees, penalties for violations on both sides. It was messy, frustrating, imperfect. It was democracy. That evening, Lucien found Lena in the restored portrait hall, studying paintings of kings and queens long dead. She looked exhausted, her shoulders still healing, dark circles carved beneath her eyes. "They want to make you ambassador," he said quietly. "Official position on the Joint Council. Living symbol that cooperation works." "I know." Lena didn't turn around. "Marcus told me. He thinks I should accept." "What do you think?" "I think I'm a waitress who got lucky." She finally looked at him. "I don't know how to be a symbol. How to carry that weight." Lucien stepped closer, and the movement was careful, almost hesitant. 500 years of isolation didn't disappear in 3 weeks. "Be my queen," he said. Lena's breath caught. "Lucien. Not because of prophecy. Not because you're a symbol." He took her hand, marveling as he always did at the painless warmth. "Because you see me. The monster and the man and everything in between. Because you make me want to be better than what I was made to be." "I don't know how to be royalty," Lena whispered. "I don't know how to be kind." His smile was tentative, unpracticed. "We'll learn together." The coronation ceremony was unlike any in vampire history. Traditional elements remained: the ancient crown, the throne room, the formal oaths. But Lena insisted on modifications. Mortal witnesses alongside vampire nobles. Marcus standing as her personal guard. Vows spoken in contemporary language rather than archaic formality. When Lucien placed the crown on her head, delicate silver work rather than the heavy gold of vampire royalty, he whispered words only she could hear. "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for letting me," she replied. Afterward, Dr. Soren presented his research to the assembled court. Charts and data that made ancient magic quantifiable. "The curse broke because Miss Cross's sacrifice was genuinely selfless," he explained, his academic enthusiasm barely contained. "Not performed for reward or recognition. Not calculated for advantage. She saw suffering and moved to prevent it, expecting nothing in return." He looked at Lena with something approaching reverence. "That kind of purity is the rarest magic. Rarer than any spell Marius could have cast." "So anyone could have broken it?" Lady Vex asked skeptically. "Any mortal who acted selflessly?" "In theory," Soren admitted. "In practice, genuine selflessness is exceedingly rare. Most acts of heroism carry some element of calculation, reputation, reward, recognition." Lena Cross just moved. No time for anything except compassion. The ceremony concluded at dawn, deliberately. The city gathered in the great square outside the stronghold, mortal and vampire both, watching screens broadcasting the throne room. Lucien and Lena stood on the balcony as the sun began rising. Early morning light, still safe for vampires, but symbolic of the boundary they were crossing. "I spent 500 years in darkness," Lucien said, his hand finding hers. "Convinced it was all I deserved. That isolation was strength." "And now?" Lena asked. He looked at her, mortal, temporary, luminous in the growing light. "Now I think maybe darkness is just what happens when we're too afraid to reach for dawn." Below them, the city stirred. Mixed patrols walked streets that had been divided for centuries. The Midnight Diner, rebuilt with joint funding, prepared to open its doors to both species. Resistance remained on both sides, but something had shifted. Not erased. Just shifted. Marcus looked up at the balcony from his position in the square, gave a small nod. Lena nodded back. Dr. Soren adjusted his tablet, already documenting this moment for history. And King Lucien, monster, monarch, man, stood beside his mortal queen as dawn broke over a city learning to choose hope over fear, connection over isolation, the terrifying work of change over the comfortable certainty of division. It wouldn't be easy. It would never be easy. But standing there, her hand in his, neither burning nor breaking, just held, Lucien thought maybe that was the point. The hardest things were always worth doing. 6 months after the coup, Lena walked through the mortal district wearing jeans and a jacket that didn't quite hide the royal insignia embroidered on the collar. She'd insisted on keeping it subtle, no crown, no guards, just a woman visiting the neighborhood she'd called home for 6 years. The streets had changed. Mixed patrols, one vampire, one mortal, walked beats that had been segregated for centuries. Tension remained thick enough to taste, but the violence had shifted from certainty to possibility. Progress measured in the absence of bloodshed rather than the presence of harmony. The Midnight Diner stood rebuilt on its original foundation, the neon signs spelling "Open 24 hours" without any dead letters. Lena pushed through the door, and the bell chimed the same off-key note it always had. Marcus stood behind the counter, older somehow despite only 6 months passing. Managing the first integrated diner in the city had aged him in ways bullets hadn't. "Your Majesty," he said with exaggerated formality, then grinned. "You want the usual? Don't start." Lena slid onto her old stool, the vinyl cracked in the same familiar places. And yes, he poured coffee from the same chipped pot, set it in front of her with the same practiced motion. A vampire couple sat in the back booth, young, nervous, making a statement just by being there. 3 mortal truckers occupied the counter, pointedly ignoring them. No violence. Just coexistence held together with duct tape and stubborn hope. "You changed the world," Marcus said quietly, "and you're still drinking the cheapest coffee we serve. It tastes like home." Lena wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "How are things really?" "Difficult. Every shift is a negotiation. Last week a vampire kid asked for rare steak and the cook almost quit." Marcus wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency. "But we're open. Both species eating under the same roof." "That's something." "That's everything," Lena corrected. An hour later, she entered the stronghold through the public entrance, newly constructed, allowing controlled mortal access to the outer halls. Tour groups walked ancient corridors, guided by vampire docents who explained history with varying degrees of comfort. Cultural exchange packaged as tourism. Progress in small, uncomfortable steps. She found Lucien in his private study, the one space still entirely his. He stood before an easel, paintbrush moving with the same careful precision she remembered from months ago. But the subject had changed. He was painting her. Not as she was now queen, ambassador, symbol, but as she'd been that night. Mid-leap, body twisting to shield him, face set with determination that had nothing to do with prophecy and everything to do with instinct. Blood already blooming across her white uniform. The moment before impact. "You're capturing my good side," Lena said softly. Lucien didn't startle. 5 centuries meant very little surprised him anymore. "Your brave side. Your impossibly selfless side." He set down the brush, finally turning to face her. "I'm trying to remember it exactly. The moment everything changed. It's beautiful. It's inadequate." He studied the canvas critically. "I can't quite capture the madness of it. That you saw a monster about to die and decided he was worth saving." Lena moved closer, studying the painting. He'd gotten the rain right the way it had turned the pavement into a mirror, reflecting neon and streetlights. The angle of her body, thrown forward with reckless abandon. The expression on his face in the background, shock giving way to something like wonder. "Do you regret it?" Lucien asked, and his voice was quiet, almost fragile. "Taking those bullets?" Lena was silent for a long moment. Long enough that she saw devastation beginning to form in his ancient eyes. "Every day," she admitted finally. His face crumpled. "My shoulder still aches when it rains," she continued. "I have nightmares about the sound bullets make when they tear through flesh. I lost my anonymity forever. Lost the ability to just be Lena who serves coffee, became Lena the symbol, the crimson shield, the queen who broke a curse." She turned to face him fully. "I lost my invisibility. And some days, that terrifies me more than dying did. Lena. But I'd do it again." She took his hand, marveling as she always did at the warmth between them. "Not because of prophecy. Not because some ancient text said I was supposed to. Because I chose you. I saw someone worth saving and I moved. And I'd make that same choice every single day for the rest of my mortal life." Lucien's thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture of affection he was still learning. "I've lived 5 centuries," he said quietly. "Watched empires rise and fall. Seen wonders and horrors humans can't imagine. But you," his red eyes met hers, and they were no longer cold. "You've given me the only years that mattered. The only ones where I remembered what it meant to be more than a monster wearing a crown." They stood there in the study, surrounded by books and paintings and evidence of someone who'd spent centuries trying to remember his humanity through art and learning. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent toward evening. "Walk with me," Lena said. They went to the balcony where they'd stood during her coronation. The city spread below them, Mortal District and Vampire Quarter, no longer quite so divided. Mixed patrols. Integrated businesses. The Joint Council building under construction. Marius's trial approaching, designed to prove justice could exist without vengeance. It wasn't perfect. Violence still erupted, fear given teeth by those who preferred the old certainties to new uncertainties. But the city was trying. Stumbling, imperfect, but trying. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in colors that had names in languages Lucien had watched die. Early evening light, still safe for vampires, no longer the barrier it had been. "I used to hate this time of day," Lucien admitted. Dawn meant ending. Retreat. Return to darkness. And now? He looked at her, mortal, temporary, luminous in the fading light. "Now it just means I get to watch you exist in it. And that's enough." Lena leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her with the careful reverence of someone still learning that touch didn't have to mean pain. Below them, the city prepared for night. Not with fear. Not anymore. Just with the quiet acceptance that darkness and light were both necessary, both temporary, both part of the eternal cycle. "The night doesn't have to be eternal," Lena whispered. "And monsters don't have to die to be redeemed." "What do they have to do?" Lucien asked. "Just choose. Every day. Choose connection over isolation. Choose compassion over fear. Choose to believe that maybe salvation comes from the unlikeliest places." She smiled up at him. Like a tired waitress, a cup of coffee, and the simple radical act of refusing to look away from suffering. As the sun disappeared and the stars emerged, King Lucien and Queen Lena stood together, watching their impossible city try to become something better than what it had been. The road ahead was long, uncertain, paved with resistance and setbacks and the terrifying work of sustained change. But they'd walk it together. Monster and mortal. King and waitress. Two people who'd found each other in rain and bullets and broken curses, choosing every day to believe that the hardest things were always worth doing. That's how a nobody became a queen, and how a monster remembered his humanity. Not through prophecy or destiny or ancient magic, but through the simple revolutionary act of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over the comfortable certainty of division. If stories like this resonate with you, I'd love to have you join me for the next one. Until then, may you find the courage to choose connection over fear. Tell me in the comments what was your favorite moment. The bullet scene, the throne room confrontation, Lena standing between kings. I want to know. Thank you for being part of the story family. See you tomorrow for another incredible journey. Until then, remember, even the longest night can learn to hold the dawn.